Long before the events of September 11th, plane hijackings were a frequent and dramatic tactic employed by Palestinian militant groups during the late 1960s and 1970s. Their goals ranged from attracting international attention for the Palestinian cause to securing the release of prisoners held in Israeli jails. These hijackings put pressure on Israel and Western nations to negotiate with their civilians held at gunpoint, sometimes leading to mass prisoner exchanges. Yet Israel often countered with equally daring responses, such as in 1976, when Israeli commandos flew thousands of miles to storm Entebbe airport in Uganda to free hostages as opposed to negotiating. This video explores the rise and fall of Palestinian plane hijackings and how they became a key chapter in the Israel-Palestine conflict. On July 23, 1968, El Al Flight 426, a Boeing 707, was scheduled to fly from Leonardo da Vinci Fiumicino Airport in Rome to Lod Airport, now known as Ben Gurion International Airport, in Tel Aviv. After the aircraft departed Rome, the pilots requested coffee from the cabin crew. As it was being brought in, two hijackers associated with the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, PFLP, forced their way into the cockpit. One of them struck the flight engineer with a pistol butt and ordered the plane to fly to Algiers. After landing at Dar el Beida Airport in Algeria, the Algerian authorities grounded the plane. The following day, non-Israeli passengers were flown to France, whilst by July 27th, all women and children had also been released, leaving 12 Israeli men and 10 crew members as hostages. The PFLP demanded, with Algerian backing, that Israel release more than 1,000 prisoners. However, following a global boycott of Algeria by the International Pilots Federation, a deal was reached. Israel freed 16 Palestinian prisoners in exchange for the hostages. For Israel, it was the first plane hijacking that led to humiliating negotiations with what they viewed as terrorists. The next hijacking took place on August 29, 1969. TWA Flight 840 was en route from Rome to Tel Aviv when it was hijacked by members of the PFLP. The hijackers targeted the flight as they believed that Yitzhak Rabin, Israel's ambassador to the United States, was aboard the flight. This incident would later be recorded as the first airplane hijacking ever carried out by a woman. Layla Khaled, alongside her accomplice Salim Isawi, stormed the cockpit of the Boeing 707 shortly after takeoff, armed with grenades. Khaled forced the pilot to fly low over Haifa, the town she and her family had fled in 1948 to become refugees in Lebanon, before diverting the flight to Damascus, Syria. When the aircraft landed at Damascus International Airport, the hijackers evacuated the passengers and crew and then detonated explosives in the plane's nose section, leaving it heavily damaged. The Syrian authorities arrested the hijackers and immediately released the 12 crew members and 95 passengers, retaining 6 Israeli passengers. Of the 6, 4 were released shortly afterward, while the remaining 2 were held for several months until they were exchanged for 71 Syrian and Egyptian soldiers. And what of the hijackers? Both Khaled and Isawi were released without charge before the last Israeli hostages had returned home. A photograph of 25-year-old Khaled, taken on the day of the hijacking, captured the world's imagination. The 1970s press often referred to her as the girl terrorist and the deadly beauty. On September 6, 1970, the most audacious of the Palestinian plane hijackings unfolded in a coordinated series of attacks. Members of the PFLP targeted multiple flights in what became known as the Black September hijackings. The first attempted hijacking of the day took place aboard El Al Flight 219 en route from Amsterdam to New York. Layla Khaled and her accomplice Patrick Arguello tried to seize control of the Boeing 707. However, their plan was thwarted when Captain Uri Bar-Lev, a former Israeli Air Force pilot, put the plane into a steep nosedive, throwing the hijackers off balance. Arguello was shot and killed by an onboard Shin Bet security agent, while Khaled was subdued and handed over to British authorities upon landing in London. A total of 3 other planes were successfully hijacked and diverted to Dawson's Field, a remote desert airstrip in Jordan, which the PFLP dubbed their Revolutionary Airport. The first was Swissair Flight 100, carrying 145 passengers and 12 crew members from Zurich-Kloten Airport in Switzerland to John F. Kennedy International Airport in the United States. Next was Pan Am Flight 93, a Boeing 747, carrying 152 passengers and 17 crew from Brussels to New York, with a stopover in Amsterdam. After being hijacked, the plane first landed in Beirut, where it refueled and picked up several associates of the hijackers, along with enough explosives to destroy the entire aircraft. Due to concerns over Dawson's field's capacity to accommodate the jumbo jet, the hijackers instead diverted the plane to Cairo, where it was blown up seconds after the passengers were evacuated. TWA Flight 741, a Boeing 707 carrying 144 passengers from Tel Aviv to Athens and Frankfurt, was next. The hijackers took control of the cockpit and forced the plane to land at Dawson's field. The final plane, BOAC Flight 775 from Mumbai to London, was hijacked on September 9th and forced to land at Dawson's field. While most of the 310 hostages were released by September 11th, the PFLP retained 56 Jewish hostages and 6 U.S. citizens. Among them were U.S. Defense Department researcher Robert Norman Schwartz and U.S. State Department employee John Hollingsworth. The hijackers held a press conference at the airstrip for 60 international journalists, demanding the release of their comrades held in European jails, including Layla Khaled. On September 12th, the PFLP dramatically blew up the 3 empty planes at Dawson's field, an event that was broadcast worldwide and described by the media as the blackest day in aviation history. 56 hostages remained in captivity until September 30th, when a negotiated agreement secured their release in exchange for 7 Palestinian prisoners held in European jails. The crisis proved to be a turning point for Jordan's King Hussein, who viewed the hijackings as the final straw in the growing influence of Palestinian militants within his kingdom. In response, he launched a brutal military crackdown known as Black September, during which thousands of Palestinians were killed, and the Palestine Liberation Organization was forced to relocate to Lebanon. On May 8, 1972, 4 terrorists hijacked a Sabena Airlines Boeing 707, Flight 571, traveling from Brussels to Tel Aviv with a stop in Vienna. Posing as couples, they had flown on forged passports from Lebanon to Rome, then Frankfurt, and finally Brussels, where they boarded Flight 571. After the plane landed at Lod Airport, the hijackers demanded the release of 315 Palestinians convicted of terrorism offenses in Israeli jails, threatening to blow up the aircraft with its passengers if their demands were not met. Whilst appearing to negotiate, Minister of Defense Moshe Dayan began planning an operation to free the hostages. The rescue effort quickly turned into a who's who of future Israeli leadership. 2 proposals emerged. Meir Dagan, future head of the Mossad, suggested shaving heads and posing as Arab prisoners, then boarding the plane for an attack. Meanwhile, Ehud Barak, future IDF Chief of General Staff and Prime Minister, proposed having Sayeret Matkal, Israel's elite commando unit, disguise themselves as airport staff, storm the aircraft, and neutralize the terrorists. Ultimately, Barak's plan was chosen, and 24 hours later, he led 16 commandos from Sayeret Matkal, slowly approaching the aircraft in the white overalls airport staff would wear. They surprised the hijackers by entering through the emergency exits and opened fire in the cabin, killing 2 male terrorists and capturing 2 female terrorists. 3 passengers were wounded, whilst a 22-year-old woman died in hospital after being caught in the crossfire. Only 1 commando was injured, a Benjamin Netanyahu, who would go on to become one of Israel's longest-serving and most controversial prime ministers. Whilst the hijackers were sentenced to hundreds of years in prison, they were eventually released in prisoner exchange deals. Known as Operation Isotope, the mission is famous in Israel for including 2 future prime ministers. The most dramatic hijacking occurred on June 27, 1976, when an Air France Airbus A300 traveling from Tel Aviv to Paris with a scheduled layover in Athens was seized by 2 members of the PFLP and 2 German leftist terrorists, taking 248 passengers hostage. Shortly after leaving Athens, they diverted the plane to Entebbe airport in Uganda, where President Idi Amin and Ugandan troops supported the hijackers in confining the captives. Upon arrival, non-Israeli or Jewish hostages were set free. In total, they demanded a $5 million ransom for the aircraft's release, as well as freedom for 53 militants held in Israel, Kenya, West Germany, and elsewhere. They threatened to execute hostages beginning July 1st if their demands were not met. Under pressure, the Israeli government entered into negotiations while also pursuing diplomatic efforts to free the hostages. A retired IDF officer, Baruch Bar-Lev, repeatedly tried to leverage his personal relationship with Idi Amin to release the captives, but to no avail. Israel also enlisted the help of the US government and Egyptian President Anwar Sadat to lobby Uganda to release the hostages. However, this also failed. Ultimately, Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin authorized planning for a military raid. One of the main obstacles was refueling the Lockheed C-130 Hercules aircraft so far from Israeli airspace. While several East African nations were sympathetic, none wished to incur the wrath of Amin or the Palestinians by allowing the Israelis to land their aircraft within their borders. Eventually, members of the Jewish community in Kenya used their influence to persuade Kenyan President Jomo Kenyatta to allow the Israelis to refuel in Nairobi. On July 3rd, Israel dispatched 4 C-130H Hercules planes escorted by Phantom jets carrying 100 to 200 soldiers on a 2,500-mile flight to Entebbe. A 29-person assault team from Sayeret Matkal, led by Yonatan Netanyahu, older brother of future Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, was tasked with storming the terminal. After landing in Nairobi, 2 jeeps and a black Mercedes, identical to the car of Idi Amin, were offloaded from the plane. Netanyahu's unit drove slowly and calmly towards the old terminal, appearing as if they were Ugandan forces in familiar vehicles. Taken by surprise, the Ugandan forces guarding the hostages were overpowered before reinforcements could arrive. The IDF departed Entebbe just 58 minutes after landing, having killed the hijackers and 45 Ugandan soldiers. Yonatan Netanyahu was the sole Israeli commando killed in the operation, shot by Ugandan forces during the rescue. In the aftermath of the raid, Dora Bloch, a 71-year-old Israeli hostage who had been taken to the hospital, was murdered in revenge. Enraged by Kenya's cooperation with Israel, Amin ordered retaliation against Kenyans living in Uganda, resulting in the massacre of hundreds and thousands fleeing as refugees. 40 years later, on the anniversary of the mission, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited Entebbe as part of an official delegation. Often regarded as one of the IDF's most daring missions, the Entebbe raid is celebrated by Israelis as one of the nation's finest moments. During the 1980s and 1990s, Palestinian groups adapted their methods in response to shifting political and military realities. As airports and airlines implemented stricter security protocols, plane hijackings became increasingly difficult to carry out. Additionally, as hijackings grew more frequent, they lost their effectiveness in drawing international attention to the Palestinian cause. While always viewed as acts of terrorism, their continued use further damaged the Palestinian movement's reputation in the eyes of the global community. At the same time, Yasser Arafat transitioned from a guerrilla leader to a statesman, delivering speeches at the United Nations and engaging in official visits to Western nations. And thus he had to abandon international hijackings for a more targeted approach. Palestinian militant groups shifted their focus to attacks within Israel, such as bus bombings, suicide attacks, and rocket fire. Were the plane hijackings justified in their attempt to bring attention to the Palestinian cause and free Palestinian prisoners? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. I've been your host, Albert. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe. Until next time.